We are live now, so we start the video.
No, I think everybody is now here. So, I mean, everybody who should be is now here, so.
Fantastic. So let's start up with this warm-up video, and we'll be very, very shortly all together here.
Welcome to the tomorrow of healthcare in the Oracle Cloud. A place where disruption is your reality, and digital agility is the cost of entry. This is a world that rewards those who embrace bold ideas, fueled by intelligent data. This is a place where healthcare stays focused on caregiving, where health plans, hospitals, and health systems become active enablers, engaging patients as dynamic participants in their own wellness, where every aspect of the business of healthcare is orchestrated for organizations, intelligently automating, reducing human error, freeing you to progress your mission, where healthcare professionals are nurtured, developed, and given real-time feedback to help them better care for others, where operational excellence and people-first experiences meet clinical excellence, where administrators and caregivers work as one, intelligently and proactively gaining the insight to focus services and resources where they have the greatest impact. Take command of the digital age. The future of healthcare in the Oracle Cloud.
Pela família, pelos amigos, pelas férias, pelo futuro, pela sua saúde. Não adie mais o que ficou esquecido. Em 2020, quase 5 milhões de exames clínicos não Covid ficaram por fazer. Pela sua saúde, não adie mais os exames que o ajudam a cuidar de si. Unilabs, há uma química que nos une.
Sometimes it's hard to come home and act as if you didn't just witness something life-changing. Because you did. You were part of a critical moment in someone's life. And it makes me wonder, why is this my choice? Why am I a nurse? I know I can't change the whole world, but I can change it for one person, even if it's only for an hour or two. By being there when it counts. Nursing is a process. Assess the patient, implement care plans, get the right people together. Heart rate 115, temperature 38.5, saturation 88. Could it be a surgical site infection?
Get infection parameters. I'll be there in 5.
And technology enables just that. Connect with the colleagues, access and share information, prevent documentation errors, stay by my patient's side. It means I can do a little bit more for my patients.
Hi, Michael. I hear you have problems with your leg. Send him to ICU.
And I get to change their world.
Hang on, guys.
And I just know.
Thank you.
This is what I'm meant to do. That's why I'm a nurse.
So welcome back, everybody, and it's so good to have you all back here with us now for this second to last session in this global hybrid summit. So we are going to start now the hybrid dialogue cafe, and I would like to call into the table the local presence here, Dr. Manuel Cardoso, Deputy Director of CICAD. It's the organizational unit in the Ministry of Healthcare that oversees drug addiction and behavioral addiction in general. From the Ministry of Healthcare, it's really a pleasure to have him registered to this summit, and has his endorsement by the CICAD, as you can see in our members webpage. It's great that he can make the local presence, so we can actually call this an hybrid meeting, an hybrid gathering here. And with me in this beautiful Zoom mosaic are our guest speakers that are connecting from different parts of the world, but essentially we call it here in Portugal our brother country, Brazil, our brother nation, Brazil, and it's great that they can be here in this session in English. This session will be shared and moderated by Professor Céu Mateus, as professor of health economics in Lancaster University, and also Céu Mateus is a community leader because she's leading the community of Health Economics Association in Portugal, and they have that recently had our national congress a few days ago. We couldn't match at that, so that Professor Céu Mateus could also stay over in Porto, but perhaps next year we can do that trick and have her as well here with us. And also our dear colleagues from Brazil. I think that we miss you so much here in presence, so they have this human connection in video is fine. We all see each other's faces. We'll be able to communicate and exchange knowledge, but it will be different if you will be here with us. And I sincerely hope that in future editions of the Health Data Forum, we perhaps next year we decide to choose Brazil as our guest country and have a strong presence of Brazil here. Because as we have seen from the opening session on yesterday, and interventions from Antonio Pereira, the CEO of Hospital Clínicas in São Paulo. It's one of the biggest hospitals in South America. And it's definitely a path for collaboration and for innovation that we can rapidly can materialize. As we are here in the Faculty of Medicine of Porto University, is also a sort of a sister organization of Hospital Clínicas, and now we have here this a panel with representatives from Minister of Healthcare of Brazil and also Minister of Science and Technology of Brazil. It's good to have here Jonas Sertório, José Contijo. Thank you so much for being here with us. Also Renata, from a legal expert in healthcare, has been a renowned speaker in international forums. I've met Renata virtually in a forum from IMSS, and it's good to have you here, Renata. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, of course, our host, and Céu Mateus, she's now on video off. I'll back on. So thank you so much for taking your busy schedule. I know that Céu Mateus has to finish in 1 hour, and that's precisely the time you're going to have for these conversations. Dr. Manuel Cardoso, I already introduced, is in the table. If we can put the screen for the table as well. And over to you, Céu. I hope that you have. And Jen Montreux, sorry about that. I almost forgot about our Jen Montenay. The opening speaker of this panel. I was not wearing my glasses. Sorry about this, Jane. So good to see you. And Jane is reaching us from very close here, thanks to these Zoom facilities. There are no distance anymore, right? So Jane, thank you also for coming. And as I said, Céu, over to you to share and moderate this hybrid cafe. And I hope that you have a good session and a good dialogue.
sorry, after 18 months of pandemic, I still don't know, that you need to unmute before starting. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you, Paulo, very much for this very kind invitation to be here today to moderate this session. It's a really pleasure for me to be here today. I apologize. My light is not the best. I'm a bit in a shadow, but we have moved buildings. It's the first week that I returned to my office, and well, not enough meetings yet to realize that the camera wasn't the best one for this kind of event. So I apologize for that. And without further ado, I would pass the session to Jane to share with us a presentation, and then we will follow from there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Let's see if I can get this working properly. Let's see. Is that fine? Can you see?
Yes, Jane, we can, please.
That's great. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to present. As I said, my name's Jane Mountney. I work as Head of Public Health at the European Drug Agency. It's got a long name, EMCDDA, but effectively we're part of the European Union, and we're based in Lisbon. So very pleased to be here with Portuguese colleagues and international colleagues. Very briefly, why our agency is interesting in terms of data and healthcare. As I say, we're essentially a European information hub on drugs, and this is illicit drugs as opposed to pharmaceutical. We've been around for about 25 years, and we have lots of data. Essentially, we have focal points in all the member states, plus Norway and Turkey, who deliver data, most of it health and epidemiological, to us. We analyze it, produce reports, and our goal is to provide objective, reliable, timely information on the drug situation and responses, and feed that to policymakers and practitioners, decision makers, essentially, so they can make good public health decisions. We also cover the markets and other areas, but that's not my focus. So again, this is a little bit top level, but see how it fits with perhaps more of a clinical perspective. But some of the key public health questions that we try to address at the EU level will be familiar and hopefully interesting for you. There are issues of prevalence. So how many people are actually using illicit drugs, particularly opioids, and problematic patterns of use? How many are injecting? What are the trends? We've got some key epidemiological indicators from, again, all the member states send data. So we have general population survey data, problem drug use data, surveys, etc. We try and understand who's actually going into treatment for drug-related problems and have an indicator called the TDI and the characteristics of those people. We look at risk factors and harms. We follow drug-related overdose deaths and the characteristics of people who experience these. We also look at drug-related harms and infectious diseases. So those are sort of our core data sets. We then try and use those to answer questions around availability of services, is need being met at a very top level, and coverage. Again, we try and follow what's going on right now, what we should be prepared for. So we look at new trends. We have data collection on new psychoactive substances. Some of you will have followed, we do risk assessments on harms in relation to new drugs. And also we tend to work with ECDC on outbreaks, so drug-related outbreaks. The context for our work is the EU drug strategy, and also we follow the WHO goals, HCV elimination agenda, etc. Now, our problem is, as the panel will well recognise, it's a stigmatised behaviour. So data collection is not the easiest thing in this area. There's all sorts of reasons why the data is imperfect. But again, when we're looking at the EU level, we've got many countries with different definitions. What constitutes cannabis treatment, for example, in one country might be very different to another. Collection systems are different, and there's issues of completeness with data. So perhaps for other non-infectious diseases, which perhaps a little bit simpler to answer, it's an area which is, there's quite a lot of data, but most of it's indirect when we talk about indicators. And I just wanted to, I know I've only got a short time, give you a couple of examples of the type of data we collect at the EU level. So we follow, for the 29 countries, we work with trends in overdose deaths, and we can do breakdowns by countries. We can look to some extent at the substances. On the right-hand side, we follow the changes in age of people. This is another characteristic we can follow. What this shows is what we call an aging cohort of primarily problem opioid users, because we see the overdoses are increasing in the older age groups. We can look at risk factors in this area of drug-related deaths, the proportion by country of males to females. So we see some countries have a lot more women who are dying from drug-related issues. And the other is about age. So again, some countries have increased numbers of younger people dying from drug-related deaths. So this is quite interesting in terms of tailoring and targeting responses. In terms of the interaction, so we also monitor responses, and in Europe there's a range of responses available for services to respond to these particular health issues. I won't go into those in detail, but we follow which countries are offering which services. So, for example, in Europe, in the EU, every country has some extent opioid substitution treatment, which evidence shows is probably the best intervention for prevention of opioid overdose. But it's a lot rarer for countries to have drug consumption rooms, take-home naloxone programs. So this is an area we look at. And then we look at coverage. This is tricky, but again, interesting. It's a WHO target. So here we have needle and syringe distribution and opioid substitution treatment. In terms of the coverage for the particular group, the problem opioid user group. And I mean, what this essentially shows is this great variation. Some countries have got relatively good coverage for these health services, others it's very low. And this information can help people if they're looking to promote change. Okay, so I focused mainly on our core data sets, our epidemiological indicators, but the last 10 years, there's been a lot of innovation in data. We've been essentially complementing our traditional health data sets with new methods and new sources. We've leveraged things like wastewater epidemiology. You've perhaps heard of that, where you can take measurements in the sewers. So it's a population level drug test, essentially, to complement surveys and actually see how much cocaine is being used at a population level, for example. Another interesting one is actually examining what's available in the syringes. So the residues in collected needle and syringes, we can do that to follow which drugs are actually being injected. So what's really being used. The sources we've been leveraging are of three types. One is online sources. So a lot of the new ones are online and digital. These give us speed because lots of our reporting is a bit delayed, but online helps speed. We've got open source information that we monitor. There's darknet markets, crypto markets information. So those are interesting. We're increasingly using forensic analysis. This gives us reliability. So the more we improve our toxicology, the better reliability we get. So we've got drug checking data, drug driving data, etc. The last is we're working more with experts. We've got expert networks where we've got people working on the ground to validate some of our data. But we triangulate, and I think this is really key in the area of illicit drug data. No one source tells the truth, but often a combination, triangulated data sources, gives us a good idea of what's happening. Increasingly, we're using co-production, working with people, both user groups, people who are using drugs, but also people working in frontline services to understand what's happening. We're looking increasingly at signal detection rather than looking backwards, but actually looking to pick up signals as we go along in terms of new developments and more rapid assessment, risk assessment when things occur. And finally, looking a little bit ahead, we're engaging in some scenario building and futures planning to try and anticipate what's going to happen in the future. So this is my last slide, just to kick off the conversation. The idea of preparedness and how can data help us be prepared for what's going to happen in the health area. And certainly at the EU level, the focus is on what we call cross-border health threats and preparedness. Some of the things that we're trying to begin to understand and that data needs to help us with are the following. So what are the actual impact of COVID, particularly in terms of drug-related deaths? What's going to happen and how should we be prepared in terms of comorbidity, drugs and mental health issues, and how can data help us here? Stimulants. We've got a big issue with cocaine coming into Europe, which is slightly new to such an extent. We need to understand that and think of what the implications are going to be for healthcare in the future. We've talked a long time again in Europe about globalization, the impact of synthetic opioids. We haven't seen in Europe what's going on in the US and North America, but there's always the potential for the new synthetic opioids, the fentanyls, to come, and the preparedness issue there. How will we notice and what do we do? And finally, an interesting one I think people are wondering about is the impact here, and again, a global issue in Afghanistan and the Taliban. We saw in Europe a really big impact on the heroin market. We've got over 1 million heroin users, problem opioid users rather, not just heroin, in Europe. And if there is a cut or a shock to the supply chain for the opioids, that our primary opioid is heroin, what do we need? How will we spot it, and how do we need to be prepared? So interesting questions that we're beginning to think of and look at how data can help us. So thank you for the opportunity to present. Anyone who's interested, EMCDDA website, lots of data, statistical bulletin, many resources. Please go and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for a very interesting presentation. I would like to start this roundtable with a question for Jonas. I suppose that the situation in Brazil is quite different. Or do you relate what's going on in Brazil with what Jane presented? You're muted.
Hi, Sal. Hi, everyone. Can you rephrase your question? I couldn't hear you.
I was asking if how do you relate the situation in Brazil regarding the problems with drug abuse and the data collection process with what Jane presented?
I think we have pretty much the same problems as well as Jane, but we still have like another situation that's culture, data analytics. So I think people still have to understand and incorporate this kind of culture where all decisions must be data driven, or at least 90% of them. So we're still like a long way to structure the whole ecosystem with regard to drug abuse and drug related deaths.
Okay. I would like now to pass this session to the people in the room, and I have a question, or I'll be asking for a comment from Emmanuel that is physically in Porto. We know that CICAD work is of paramount importance in Portugal, and it's at world leading level in some aspects. So we have had many policies regarding drug treatment and also the drug abusers. What would you like to add to Jane's presentation?
Thank you, Seo. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. I have to stress in this situation that, firstly, that drug addiction is still a crime in most of the countries in the world. So it's difficult to have data about these patients. Even in Portugal, they criminalize in 2001. But before that, the treatment we had came firstly from the units from the Ministry of Justice, and only in 87 or 19 and these facilities come to Ministry of Health, and the responses start to be done in the Ministry of Health. Saying so, at that time also, and it was very difficult to start treating people in the National Health Service, in hospitals or in primary health care. And because of that, the Ministry of Health create network, a specific network to deal with these patients. And also because firstly, it was crime, and the people to be treated went to the facilities anonymously. It was difficult to ask them or to collect data from them. All of us could understand that. Saying that was crime, I have to stress also to all the audience that nowadays, in 33 countries in the world, death penalty is the penalty of using drugs. So I think it's important to emphasize, to stress the stigmatization that these people had. So saying this, it was difficult, and it is difficult even after decriminalization and having this network to collect data from patients at all at the beginning, and collect data from the interventions we made to these patients. And we have to create a database, a tailored database related to this. And in the 2007 and 8, we created a database that could collect data from all patients, and it's a central database with the patients could be attended in any units all over the country, and the database is the same. The physicians or the other professionals can deal with and have the information of the patient all over the country. So this is the first step, to have this national database. We only years later, or now, we have the central database where all citizens in Portugal have the possibility to have this data. And we start at the time, I think, well. We have difficulties to collect all, but we have done this, and now we are enlarging the relations on this network. Firstly, to the database on patients on the National Health Service. Anyone could be assessed in this our system, that is, we called it the multidisciplinary system, information system, because it collects information coming from data information from patient, but also collected by the doctor, by the nurse, the psychologist, or the social worker, because we have to deal with all these issues with these patients. And now we are enlarging the relations and the network, and also to the capacity to refer these patients to primary healthcare and to hospitals who are creating this. And also we discuss a little bit in our lunch here the relation with the private sector. We are creating, we have a good relation with the private sector on therapeutic communities. We are creating a network and a relation with them with the same database. We are dealing with it now, but for sure we have lots of data, and the big question is that any patient can be attended in the north or in the south of the country, and always access their information. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would like now to ask Renata, as a lawyer and as a specialist in digital health, what are the major concerns that drug users and patients might have regarding data collection for this purpose, or where can we find the balance between privacy and the need for information to address the problem?
That's a great question. So first of all, nice to meet you all, except for Jonas, with whom I have the opportunity to join other panels in the past, but happy to be with you as well today, Jonas. And thank you for Paulo and Urska and all of the organization of this data forum, so we can discuss such a relevant topic. I think that to deep dive into Professor Saulo's question, I think that when we talk about digital health, there is no way we can, advance and move forward with this conversation without having as a premise that we have to give up a little bit of our privacy to access all of these tools and transformations that digital health is bringing to the healthcare system. And perhaps Jonas can also talk about his experience in the MOH, because the MOH has an excellent project that is called Rede Nacional de Dados de Saúde, which is basically an effort that is being made by the Ministry of Health to concentrate and to gather all of the health data that is currently, separated in many infinite silos and other tools that do not actually serve for the purpose of concentrating all the data in benefit of the patient. And this is already happening in Brazil for a while, so perhaps he can jump in after me and talk a little bit about his experience as well. But from a privacy perspective, I think that in relation to this specific situation that Professor Jane has mentioned, I think that the main concern here is going to be with regard to discriminatory purposes. And in this regard, our data protection law in Brazil, which is very much inspired on the GDPR, on the European General Data Protection Laws, expressly mention that the processing of data, including health data, overall cannot be done so for the purpose of discriminating a person. You can do so for the purpose of taking care of that person's healthcare. This is actually one of the justifications, the legal basis for processing of health data when done so by health facilities, health professionals, or health authorities. But there are, a couple of limits in terms of to whom these kind of data can be shared with. For instance, it wouldn't be necessarily mandatory to share it with criminal authorities unless there are, a legal obligation or a legal basis to do so. But I think that overall, the sense that I have here is that I think that the only way we can move forward in this use of health data, not only for social policies and health policies, it is using this data and all of this amount of aggregated big data sets that we are creating in benefit of the patients. Otherwise, they will not be, comfortable in sharing much of the information that they would in the first place if they know that all of this is going to be shared with other authorities or other persons that are not actually directly involved in the person's health assistance. So I think that this is one of the major concerns that we would have here.
Okay, thank you very much. So as Renata kicked the ball to you, Jonas, would you like to say something? I know that you also have a short presentation, so maybe now it's the time to share it with us, if you find that it will contribute to the discussion.
Sure, great. About our presentation, I think my goal here is not to solve all the problems, but to bring the problems so we can connect to all experts and we can bring solutions to them. I think that's the main idea. So just a second, let me share my screen. So among the whole, like when you talk about data SUS and all the new policy that's being developed, like we're trying to look to the whole country, to everything that's happening. But at the same time, we have certain niches or a small cluster of problems that if we can solve them, we might save a lot of resources that can later on be invested in health technology and innovation in general, and even to public assistance. So I'd like to talk a little bit about CONITEC. That's our National Committee for Health Technology Incorporation in the Brazilian public health system. So, so my name is Jonas Sertorio. I'm an innovation consultant and Minister of Health and at the MIT Technology Review in Brazil. So I just cannot, just a second. Can you see my screen? Okay, so when we talk about access to new medicines in Brazil, the National Health Surveillance Agency, Anvisa, it oversees drug approvals, basically. And Anvisa also does pharmacovigilance. So when we talk about drug reactions, we have been doing pharmacovigilance for a long time. So we are very good at collecting data, but we're still a long way on to extracting and analyzing and bringing this data and this information into reality. So the agency is also responsible for establishing regulations, application of clinical trials, and drug pricing, which is very relevant in Brazil once price are regulated here. So CMED is this price regulator chamber, and it's the key launch price decision maker and controls the increase in the maximum approved retail price to establish drugs. For example, when you have increase in sanction and annual basis upon multiple factors like inflation and exchange rate movements, medicine prices change. So new drugs can be sold to the private sector upon market regulation by Anvisa once it has received approval from CMED. However, products that seek state-funded reimbursement must overcome an additional analysis. So, so then comes into the game the National Committee for Health Technology Incorporation into the Brazilian public health system, which conducts a rigorous health technology assessment and a pharmacoeconomic analysis of these new drugs. So the final decision on funding the new drugs and procedures are taken by the Minister of Health and by the government, which faces a growing number of legal challenges, especially by patients that are seeking treatment with drugs that have been refused listing on a subsidized outpatient formulary. So, so you can understand a little bit about the Brazil's unified health system. It has 31 years of existence. It was created in 1988. So in 1988, the Brazilian Constitution defined health as a universal right and a state responsibility. And progress towards universal health coverage in Brazil has been achieved through a unified health system, and that's what we call SUS, S-U-S. And it was created in 1990. The Brazilian government, through the national health system, is the largest purchase of medicines in Brazil. This is very important. And the government provides health insurance coverage to all the nation's citizens as guaranteed in Brazil's constitution. So currently, approximately 146 million Brazilians, which is about 70% of the population, rely on the government as their primary healthcare provider. And due to the COVID-19 outbreak, public health officials believe the percentage of citizens who depend on public health care services will increase considerably over the next few years. So the fundamental principles that guide the Brazilian public health system include universal coverage, integrality, equity, and social participation. As an example, universal coverage means that every citizen has the right to health and access to all public health services. In addition, the government has a duty to provide equitable health care for all. And in the law 12401 from 2011 was a milestone in the Brazilian public health system, especially because it laid out the criteria and timeframes that established the whole health technology assessment process and established CONITEC as its commission who oversees the whole process. So the primary aim of ATA is to inform decision-making process concerning the incorporation of new technologies in order to prevent the adoption of technologies that are doubtful, that are of doubtful value for healthcare, and ensure publicly accountable decision-making. So CONITEC plays an advisory role to the Ministry of Health relative to decisions about the introduction, exclusion, and alteration of new pharmaceuticals, products, and procedures, as well as the elaboration of and review of clinical protocols and treatment guidelines. So they also the law also established the requirement of prior registration of the product at the National Health Surveillance Agency, Anvisa, so it can be evaluated for incorporation into the unified health system. So CONITEC has 13 members, so all decision-making takes 13 members into a huge meeting. And there is also an executive secretariat which oversees the whole process. Just a second. So, and when you talk about CONITEC's recommendations, these recommendations are issued based on the best available data and the best available scientific evidence regarding efficacy, effectiveness, and safety of medicines, procedures, and medical devices. And it includes an economic evaluation studies of these technologies. So when you talk about all this is all data. And this is where I'm taking the conversation. So according to legal provisions, CONITEC has 180 days to assess requests to incorporate technologies into SUS, and all the reports are submitted to public consultations in order to ensure transparency and public participation. And once CONITEC has made its recommendation, our secretary is the last one to sign this medicine or this procedure into the public health system. Just a second. So, and when you talk about decision making, and once again, I'm behind all this slide is data. So we have at least a few aspects that are taken into consideration. So we have clinical aspects like safety, efficacy, effectiveness, and all the different outcomes that are measured. We have economic aspects like costs, efficiency, cost effectiveness, and other different economic methods. And we have an organizational aspects like diffusion, logistic, utilization, the way these drugs are going to be used. And at the end, we have the patient's aspects. That's one that's been taken in consideration more recently, and it's growing in importance during the meetings. So when we talk about patients, we're talking about psychological reactions, the social impact, the ethics, and acceptability. So pretty much, so in a scale like with regard to the timing for these drugs to enter the healthcare system, CONITEC has a set goal of conducting all the appraisals within 180 days of the request by an industry or by any state in the country. So CONITEC publishes all its appraisals and has opened a public consultation process online, allowing for feedback from patients, manufacturers, physician associations, and academia. So it's a very transparent process. And once there is a positive decision by CONITEC, the technology needs to be made available in the public sector within 180 days. So far, we have about over 900 technologies have been analyzed, and we've been 671 medicines, 164 procedures, and 113 medical devices. And from this huge number, about 1,000 technologies that have been evaluated, around 56% have been incorporated. So they're being paid, they're being purchased by the healthcare system. Around 35% have not been incorporated, and around 8% were excluded. And with regard to the major medical areas, infectology, oncology, neurology, pneumology, and rheumatology are the ones that receive most of the medicine, the requests for incorporation, whether it is medicines or procedures. And our reports, they have several aspects and several types of information. Once again, we're talking about data and different types of data. So it contains data about the disease, the technology, the evidence of the analysis, the clinical evidence, the economic evaluation. We have a budget impact analysis and the public consultation. So we have it's a very tough decision to take, but we have all this huge amount of information that's taken for just one drug or just one procedure. And we have these reports to the society, so we can also allow society to understand what's being decided. So we have these reports with a very simple and straightforward language, so the whole population can have it. And soon we will also have a podcast on it. So even people that cannot read, they can get to know what's being discussed, so they can whatever they need to say, that they can come to our plenary and share the information with us. And here's I think my connection with what I want to talk about data. So we have a horizon scanning process which foresees all the technologies that will enter the market. So it's a nice way to look at the future, pretty much. So, and this is another way to look in the future. And when we look to all the technologies that are entering all our markets, and not only the Brazilian, but most of these technologies nowadays, they, at the same time, we have these worldwide clinical trials that are ongoing at the same time. So the industries, most of them, they will apply for regulatory approval and depending on the country, also for the incorporation or reimbursement at the same time. So we have all these disruptive technologies and they are being, for example, like I would like to use an example like rare diseases or even oncology that nowadays has become just a big rare disease. So we have very specific small trials with small populations, and we have regulatory approval in a very, very fast time. So we have the fast track in the USA and fast track in Brazil also. So we have a small population and the trials are conducted in a very short time, and we have this regulatory approval in a short time, and out of nothing we have to evaluate these new therapies. And then we have one huge problem, and that's why I just brought the cover from a study from ICER in the USA, where we have like all these drugs that have been either overpriced or value-based pricing, using a value-based pricing as a strategy. And it's very tough for the whole system to be sustained. So we don't have a sustainable system anymore. So I'm talking about not only the clinical data, but also all the economic and pricing data. And that's why when we think about solution, and that's why data is the solution. So this is just one idea, but we see a lot of people talking about real world data and real world evidence. And we do have a lot of data at the Ministry of Health, but we still need to understand, to analyze, and transform this data into reality, into movement, like say. So when you talk about when I think about the pitfalls and solutions on real world data and real world evidence, like it goes through science, basic science, clinical science, through the whole market access and sales and marketing and medical. And this is a slide made for the industry. But governments, while industry thinks about market access, I like to think about health access. So we go through the same timeline. So my idea is, in my proposal is, how can we use this data in a more extensive way so we can drive better decision making, not only in the clinical aspects for regulatory approval, but also for pricing. And my idea here is that once we have more data and it's being better used, governments are going to pay a better price for the technologies, or at least what's reasonable. And whatever money is left, we can reinvest into innovation, and not only for the public, but also for companies. So if, like, I don't want to talk about the government, so we have like a liberal government at the moment, and government, they want to invest in startups and companies, and it's non-refundable money for innovation. And another way to look at it is to look not only for the data that exists, but for the data that we can still collect and harvest. So then I think most of you have got in touch with this report from IQVIA that discusses all the extensive way we can use and develop all these digital technologies and digital therapeutics that can be harvesting data non-stop. And this is, at the end, it's good for the government, it's good for the companies, and good for the patient. So
Thank you very much. Are you about to now? I was just wondering whether or not you were about to finish, because we are approaching the end of our session. So I was just wondering if you have a lot more slides, or if you can wrap up now.
It's the last one.
Okay.
So real-world data and real-world evidence can definitely help us to understand how patient characteristics and behavior affect health outcomes. And we also help payers and decision makers through the whole healthcare value chain. And in the end, we have also innovation in digital technologies, including apps and wearable sensors, bringing new approach to the management of this technology. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I just have one final question for Jane and for Manuel, as they are in a more political post, sort of saying, but it's not a political question. It's just one of the things that Jonas mentioned was the need for real-world evidence. So, but anyway, we have been having data since, I don't know, thousands of years ago, since the men started to collect data. So we started to collect information and to have it and putting it together. We have a lot of information. We have a lot of data collection, but what seems to be sometimes missing is evidence-based policies. So because it's not making, we need to make sense out of real-world evidence that, at least in my mind, kind of takes me down the road to evidence-based policy in the places where you are. What are your views about real-world evidence, its strengths, and whether or not this is another way of talking about the missing link to evidence-based policy?
I'm sure Manuel will have plenty to say. I mean, absolutely a topic. That's what, in a way, it's our raison d'etre. To try and ensure that drug policy, which is extremely ideological, as you point out, and political, and just across the EU, very diverse views. So our goal is to try and get the evidence of what we actually do know works through that ideological barrier, if you like, to the people that are making decisions. And I wouldn't say we have in any way kind of come very far, but it's what we're working on, and it's a process. One of the clear things is about, you know, plain language, and not sort of, you know, expecting somebody who's really busy to read multiple papers, but that translation process of evidence and science into to a language that people will understand. But the other thing is coming backwards. It's starting with the questions that people are asking, and rather than just collecting data for the sake of it, actually thinking, what do people want to know? What's most important? And how are they most likely to hear? You know, is it through a little sort of Twitter feed, or is it through a sort of compendium that's referenced? So I think a lot of the work we're doing right now is actually that, is that translation of evidence into formats that will actually be useful to inform policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. Manuel, in a very short wrap-up.
It's difficult to answer shortly, but we have to think when we talk about drug addiction or drug use, that we are or we have conventions from the United Nations that drive us on related with us. And when we talk about a global policy, is the way we have to go through. And in this case, I think it's very difficult, as I said, having these rules of criminalization and the stigmatization of these people. However, in Europe, mostly, and I think because also of EMCDDA work, what they did, not having the possibility to manage policies in each country, because each country can do what they want to do, but they ask for some kind of data that involve member states, or ask member states for some kind of data that at the same time create in the member states the need to go in one direction. So I think not having, for instance, a survey that we can use all over the countries. We have one or two, but not in this specific case. But at the same time, asking, as Jane mentioned, TDI, it's important to member states to know what to do. But it's difficult when she mentioned the case of overdoses. It's difficult to define what is an overdose, and they define it and help member states to try to create the same relation to do so. When we go to a country like Portugal, as we have decriminalized the use of drugs, nowadays we can have information and data from patients, from the interventions we made with them, and of course we can or we may have some evidence to act in related to them. But also in European Union, as mentioned, as Jane mentioned, we can have this perception that like opioid substitution treatment is effective, like in Portugal, decriminalization and having an integrated approach and an integrated system relating treatment, prevention, harm reduction, and reintegration is really effective. I think I can say so because we are mentioned as a model that could help other situations and other countries to follow.
I think it's important what you've just said, that we have in Portugal, in this area, we have some evidence that has been used to lead policy. So it's one of the areas that, if not completely, at least partially, data has been driving the policy making. And I think it's really important. This was a very short session for the wealth of discussion that we could have had. There is a lot to say regarding digital health, drug use, drug abuse, drug policy. The problem is not going away. There are changes that we also need to monitor. I'd like to thank you all very much for being here today, and please join me in a big applause to all the speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear panel. Thank you very much, Céu Mateus, for fulfilling the time requirements. This is amazing, and definitely thank you, dear guest speakers, and for this interesting moment here. We're expanding the boundaries of health data, not just but also in public health. And Manuel Cardoso, thank you so much for your presence here. You made it real hybrid, and your conclusions were really interesting, and very proud that Portugal is setting an example in the way using health data for policy making, as Professor Seu Mateus really pointed out. So thank you all. And now I think we are going to close this live stream to have the next session at, in roughly 10 minutes, 6 minutes, so to say, or at 5:30 we'll start the next session. Okay, so a short recess and we'll be here in 4 minutes. Thank you all for joining.